Night cleaves to the Bosphorus. Drums thunder like distant heartbeats as scarlet banners whip against a storm-lit sky. At the edge of the world, a boy king stands before walls that humbled emperors and broke the will of nations. At just 21 years old, a young sultan achieved what empires for centuries had only dreamed of, the conquest of Constantinople. Cannon mouths glow like furnaces, stone and faith shudder under iron. The city's ancient crown, its triple walls, flare with fire, cries, prayer. Ships grind against chains, oars bite the dark water, hoofbeats pound through wet earth where the siege engines crawl. But this knight carries a heavier weight than steel, but behind his triumph was betrayal, family tragedy, and sacrifices that shook the empire itself. A father who returned from retirement to save a throne. A son exiled, hardened, and returned with a vision vast as the horizon. Brothers lost, rivals bought by foreign gold, vows sealed in blood. When dawn breaks, a gate will open and history will pivot on its hinges. The young sultan lifts his gaze, and the world holds its breath. Destiny tightens like a bowstring drawn to breaking point. This is the story of Sultan Mehmed II, the Conqueror. But before we dive deeper into Mehmed's extraordinary journey, I want to pause for a moment and turn to you, the heart of this channel. Tell me, where in the world are you watching this story unfold? Write the name of your city below, because history connects us across oceans and centuries. And tell me too, what moment in history stirs your soul the most? What story keeps you awake, curious, longing to know more? Share it in the comments, and in our next video, we may not only cover your chosen topic, but also thank you by name, as part of this growing circle of history lovers. This is not just our story, it's your story, and together, we bring the echoes of yesterday back to life. Murad II was a soldier king forged in siege smoke and saddle leather, a ruler who held the Ottoman frontier together against pretenders, Karamanid raids, and the restless powers of the Balkans. He was disciplined, devout, and battle-wise, the kind of sultan who slept in a campaign tent more often than in a palace hall. Then grief struck the dynasty, his elder son died, and the succession narrowed to a precocious boy, Mehmed. In the hush that follows loss, Murad looked for repose. With a hard-won peace on the Danube and the court urging stability, he did the unthinkable for an Ottoman sovereign. He abdicated. At only 12 years old, Mehmed was lifted onto the throne. The crown, however, was heavier than the boy's shoulders. Experience belonged to older men, Janissary Agas, frontier beys, and above all the formidable Grand Vizier, Kandarli Halil Pasha, whose hands guided, restrained, and sometimes overruled the young sultan. Across the sea lanes and mountain passes, word traveled fast: a child ruled in Edirne. Rivals stirred. The Byzantines whispered, the Venetians calculated, and in the west a crusading host gathered its banners, testing the mettle of the new regime. Inside the palace, factions sharpened, those who wanted a cautious empire and those who dreamed in iron and fire. When danger crested, the court summoned the old lion back. Murad returned to the saddle, marshaled the ranks, and broke the crusade with ruthless clarity. The empire breathed again, but the verdict on governance was plain. The veteran reclaimed the throne, the novice was removed from the furnace of politics and returned to the forge of preparation. Mehmed was sent to Manisa, a prince's province of orchards and barracks, tutors and drill grounds, where scholars trained his mind and commanders hardened his instincts. He had worn a crown and lost it. He would learn why. The boy who was once sultan, now lived in exile. Murad II's death in 1451 tore the empire's canvas and cleared the horizon. Mehmed, no longer a boy in Manisa, rode to Edirne with a face like steel. He took the seal, summoned the divan, and sent letters to frontier beys. The son had returned, and this time he would not be guided by another man's hand. The first tests came from blood and memory. In the harem, a swaddled infant, Mehmed's younger half-brother, posed the most dangerous threat, a banner others could raise. The order was given, quiet and final. The child died, and with him died the belief that the throne could be kept without cruelty. Beyond the walls, another claimant stirred. Orhan, an Ottoman prince kept by the Byzantines as a living key. For years Constantinople paid him a pension, ready to release him whenever the court fractured. He sent messages, sought allies, promised calm in exchange for a crown not his. Mehmed countered with gold where gold helped and force where force was needed. Networks were cut, spies unmasked, confidants replaced. Inside the palace the old balance creaked. Grand Vizier Kandarli Halil Pasha, cautious, seasoned, and used to steering Mehmed's first reign, urged prudence, treaties, delay. Mehmed listened, learned, then leaned away. He elevated Zaganos Pasha and other young hawks, shifted garrisons, and began to sketch the unthinkable on the map, the taking of Constantinople. Each step tightened the coil with Halil Pasha, who saw ruin where Mehmed saw destiny. This was no peaceful inheritance. It was a throne ringed by knives, a future bought in advance. The palace lamps burned late, scribes scratched parchment, smiths hammered iron for a purpose not yet spoken aloud. The lesson burned into the young sultan's heart: the throne was not a gift. It was a battlefield where blood was the price of power. The dream had an address long before it had a date: Constantinople. Mehmed grew up under the spell of a prophecy whispered by scholars and soldiers alike, that one day a blessed commander would take the city where two continents touch. Earlier sultans had circled those walls and failed. Bayezid I starved the city and raised Anadolu Hizari on the Asian shore, only to be broken at Ankara. Murad II probed, bargained, tightened rings of control, but never struck the final blow. Mehmed studied their attempts like a craftsman studying a cracked blade, why it broke, where it bent, and how to forge a weapon that would not fail. He began with fire. A wandering founder from Transylvania, Orban, claimed he could cast bronze monsters no city had ever faced. The Byzantines could not fund him, Mehmed could. In Edirne, furnaces roared, bellows screamed, and molds drank molten metal. The result was terrifying: bombards so vast that oxen strained to move them and teams labored hours to reload, each shot a thunderclap that could shake the spirit as much as stone. Next came the stranglehold. On the European bank opposite Bayezid's fortress, Mehmed slammed Rum-Eli Hizari into the cliffs above the Bosphorus, its triple towers staring down the strait like clenched fists. Any ship running the current without leave would be smashed by Ottoman guns. With one fortress on each shore, Black Sea lifelines to the city, grain, men, hope, were pinched shut. While the foundries glowed and the masons hammered, the sea arm learned new muscles. At Gallipoli, the navy grew: more hulls, better rigging, drilled crews who practiced rams, boardings, and shore support. Engineers mapped the Theodosian walls, measured ditches, rehearsed saps and countermines, and stockpiled timber, powder, and grain. Diplomats worked, too: treaties renewed on frontiers, problems deferred, time bought with parchment and seal. And when Constantinople's emperor sheltering the Ottoman Prince Orhan threatened to unleash him, Mehmed answered with unmistakable intent: end the intrigue, or face the consequences. In Rome, Venice, and Buda, candles burned over maps, bells sounded warnings, letters rode hard through rain. Alliances were whispered, crusades considered, credits tallied against fear. The eyes of two worlds, East and West, now turned toward the young sultan. He stood before the ancient city not as a gambler, but as an architect of inevitability. April 1453. The Ottoman host coils around Constantinople like a tightening ring of iron. Camps bloom with canvas and braziers, bombards squat in muddy batteries facing the Theodosian walls. At Mehmed's command the siege begins, prayers whispered, kettledrums pounding. Bronze throats roar, stone shot slams into ancient masonry day and night, shaking towers, cracking battlements, filling ditches with rubble and men. The defenders, Byzantines under Emperor Constantine XI with Genoese Captain Giovanni Giustiniani, answer with repair parties, counter barrages, and desperate courage. Assault ladders go up, assault ladders splinter. Saps creep forward, countermines explode beneath them. The Ottomans fail, pull back, and try again. At sea, the city's lifeline is chained shut. A great iron boom guards the mouth of the Golden Horn, floating from the city to the Genoese suburb of Galata. Ottoman galleys batter the blockade, oars bending, rams striking, but the chain holds. One bitter day, 3 stout Genoese grain ships and a Byzantine transport, swollen with wind, punch through the Ottoman line under withering fire and anchor in the Horn. The spectacle scars Mehmed like a brand. He cannot accept a barrier he cannot break. The answer is audacity. Under torchlight and secrecy, he orders dozens of light ships hauled overland on greased timbers from the Bosphorus, up and around the heights behind Galata, and slid down into the Golden Horn behind the chain. Dawn reveals sails where none should be. The defenders watch in stunned silence. Their safe harbor has become a battlefield. Ottoman guns are ferried across a hastily built floating bridge. New batteries rake the inner walls. The city must now fight on 2 fronts. May grinds toward its end. Bombards have gnawed a wide wound near the gate of St. Romanus, repairs cannot keep pace. On the night of May 28th to 29th, the final storm breaks. First the irregulars crash forward to exhaust arrows and powder, then the disciplined Anatolian ranks. Last, the Janissaries, silent until the moment of impact, advance behind shields and locked resolve. Giustiniani is wounded and carried away. A shout ripples, morale buckles. Ottoman standards surge over the breach, gates are forced from within, horns scream triumph. Morning crowns a new world. Constantinople falls on May 29, 1453. The city that had stood for 1,000 years had fallen to a 21-year-old sultan. When the smoke cleared and the last shout died in the streets, Mehmed rode not as a conqueror drunk on victory but as a man who knew history had just been rewritten. His first act was profoundly symbolic. He entered Hagia Sophia, the cathedral that had been the heart of Byzantine Christendom for a millennium. There, in that cathedral of gold and mosaic, he ordered the space to be consecrated anew. Hagia Sophia would serve as a mosque. He performed the first prayers beneath its towering dome, a gesture that announced the end of one era and the beginning of another. The conversion was deliberate, public, unavoidable, a statement that the city belonged to the Ottomans now. Yet Mehmed's hand combined iron with calculation. He declared the city the empire's new capital, intent on turning ruin into a living, beating center of power. He did not merely conquer stone, he set about refounding a metropolis. Plans moved fast, homes repaired, markets cleared of rubble, wells reopened, and granaries stocked. Where empty streets yawned, he invited people to return. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, priests, and scholars. Incentives, tax exemptions, land grants, and guarantees of safety were offered to entice settlers from across Anatolia, the Balkans, and beyond. The goal was practical and visionary: repopulate the city, restore trade, and knit a new civic fabric that could sustain an imperial capital. Religious policy mirrored this pragmatic magnanimity. While Hagia Sophia became a mosque, Mehmed issued protections for Christian and Jewish communities, allowing them to live, trade, and worship under imperial guarantees. He used local elites and administrators where useful, re-establishing a functioning civic order that balanced Ottoman authority with local continuity. Waqfs and endowments were created to fund mosques, schools, baths, and caravanserais, public works that stitched social life back together. Mehmed also thought geopolitically. Istanbul would be the hinge between continents, a capital that could bend the arc of commerce and diplomacy from Venice to Samarkand. He rebuilt harbors, strengthened fortifications, and fashioned a court that welcomed artisans, architects, and scholars, turning conquest into culture. In the quiet moments after triumph, the Sultan's vision revealed itself, not merely to possess a city, but to remake it as a cosmopolitan heart where East and West met under Ottoman rule. What had been a tomb for an empire became, by design and decree, the cradle of a new one. After Constantinople, Mehmed transformed from a bold siege master into a restless architect of empire. He rebuilt institutions, streamlining fiscal systems, asserting central control over provincial bays, and issuing laws that bound a sprawling realm to a single, uncompromising will. His military reforms sharpened the edge of Ottoman power. He expanded the navy, reorganized forces to guard both land and sea, and ensured the Janissaries served a loyal, professional corps rather than factional interests. Mehmed was also a fierce patron of culture. He filled his court with scholars, poets, and artisans from across the Mediterranean and Islamic worlds, commissioning palaces, mosques, libraries, and public works that stitched Byzantine craftsmanship to Ottoman imagination. Markets and caravan routes were reopened. Commercial privileges and tax incentives enticed merchants to the reborn capital, turning Istanbul into a crossroads of goods and ideas. Yet vision came with ruthlessness. Mehmed crushed rebellions, neutralized powerful families who resisted centralization, and did not hesitate to execute or exile rivals who threatened the state. Europe watched. Venice, Hungary, and regional lords probed for weakness, but the Sultan answered with swift campaigns and sharp diplomacy, turning threats into tributaries or buffer zones. In the end, his rule combined violent clarity with cultural fecundity. He secured borders with iron, then filled the peace with courts, schools, and works of lasting beauty. He was not only a conqueror of cities, but a conqueror of time itself, his legacy echoing across centuries. The walls have fallen, but the tale does not end with a single triumph. Victory opens a dozen new stories, of men and motives, of counsel and conspiracy. Around Mehmed stood powerful figures: Kandarli Halil Pasha, the cautious Grand Vizier who feared haste; Zaganos Pasha, the iron-voiced general who became the Sultan's sword, Orhan, the exiled prince and Byzantine pawn whose scheming flickered at the edges of civil war, the Janissaries, whose loyalty was carved in blood and whose presence could crown or crumble a ruler. Their alliances and betrayals, their bargains and sacrifices steered the fate of an empire. Next, we'll pull each thread, the vizier who clashed with the sultan, the commander who stormed walls, the conspirator hidden in plain sight, and tell the human stories behind the history. Do you want us to begin with Kandarli Halil Pasha, Zaganos, or the Janissaries? Tell us in the comments, and we'll bring them to life in our next documentary. Subscribe and tell which story to cover.